Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Well, a lot has changed over the last week. So last week's episode, I talked a lot about how the box office was sort of dwindling down because theaters are starting to close in the major cities. This week was a complete sort of paradigm shift in, I think, everybody's life in North America and throughout the world. The virus is spread all over the place. It's basically in every major city in the United States. And most places now, including here in St. Louis, we have a shelter in place order, which basically means that you shouldn't be leaving your house unless you're going to get groceries, gasoline, or medicine. And I think that's been replicated in all of California. I believe 1/4 of the United States population is now under a shelter in place order from the government. That means obviously people are not going to movies. This all changed very dramatically over the last week. Last Sunday when I did the show, it seemed like, movie theaters will probably close. The virus is sort of spreading pretty rapidly throughout the United States, so it's going to have some downstream effects pretty quickly. And it was like in the next 2 days, all of a sudden the world just sort of dropped out. And everything was different. And this last week has felt like 6 months. It's been totally insane for a lot of people. Everybody's lives have been completely upended in a variety of ways. And with the box office, there is no box office. It doesn't exist. Movie theaters are all shut down throughout the country. I don't think there's anything open. All restaurants are all shut down as well. All social gathering has been essentially banned. And so it is a really strange time, I think, for everybody. But I thought about, do I keep doing the show? Do I not? There's no real box office to talk about currently. But I felt, I'm quarantined in my house. I've got a lot of time. I love doing this. So I figured I'm just going to keep doing shows. But I think essentially what I'm going to do here is extended time machine shows. So we're going to talk about, today we're going to talk about the last sort of 20 years this weekend. We're going to talk about 2015, 2010, 2005, and 2000. And just do some brief, dives into what was going on then, what was the top 5 of the box office this weekend, and just seeing where it goes. Unfortunately, Chris couldn't make it today, but I hope to have him next week as the time machine maestro. So he'll be back next weekend, and we'll keep this going until theaters reopen. And we'll probably do like 5 years back, 10 years back, and then we'll probably next week and probably do 6 years back and then 12 years back, just to spice it up. So we're not talking about the same movies. But we're just going to dive into it. So we're just going to do the top 5 for each 5 years, going back 20 years. And see where it takes us, see if we find any surprises, see if we find any lessons or broader sort of holistic sort of viewpoints of the box office and what it's all about and how it's changed over the last 20 years. Well, let's do this. Let's dive into 2015 here. This would have been the weekend of March 20th, kind of aligns with this weekend. We had the top 5 movies were Divergent. I don't even remember. It's like a Divergent series Insurgent. So wasn't this called Divergent Insurgent? I don't know. Maybe that didn't go so well. So this one did back in March of 2015 on this weekend. It did $52 million. Already I'm surprised. $52 million for the Divergent series? Like, come on. Did 13,000 per theater and just under 4,000 theaters. Now this is like, this is part of the young adult sort of novelization that we saw with like Twilight and the Hunger Games. It was a huge movement in the last decade. And this is kind of, Divergent always seemed like it was like middle brow, or maybe even like lower, like rail level, if you know what I mean. It's not the top shelf stuff like Hunger Games. It just didn't really seem up to snuff. But this one, let's see, overall performance for Divergent Insurgent. I can't believe it was actually called that. Here's the synopsis, by the way. The stakes are raised for Triss as she searches for allies and answers in the ruins of a futuristic Chicago. Speaking of this, what about dystopian literature now in movies? Where is that going to go? Because I think for the last, I was obsessed with it for the last 20 years, and it became very popular over the last decade. I guess maybe like in some way the world was preparing us for what was about to happen. Like I watched Contagion like 100 times, literally 100 times. I've seen that movie. And like never a thought crossed my mind that like, oh, I'm going to be living all of these things out. Like I'm going to be seeing this We're not quite there yet in the US, but I think we're getting there. I mean, Italy is kind of a glimpse of what's going to happen, where 800 people died yesterday alone in 24 hours. I'm sure that's going to be replicated, unfortunately, in the United States. So what do we do with like this dystopian stuff nowadays? Does it have a totally different feel to it? Because it was just so popular and everybody was really into it back then, Hunger Games included. Triss and 4 are now fugitives on the run, hunted. But I don't really care. Do you care about the synopsis? I don't care about the synopsis. Let's just see how it did. Domestic box office here was 130 total. Inflation adjusted domestic was 140, which I think was okay. We do have to compare it to the rest of the Divergent series though, so I'll pull that up. I never read these books. I don't know much about them. International, this one did 164. So a little bit better international. The domestic share was 44%. That's actually really high though for a lot of these. A film like this, you would expect it to have, you know, a lower percentage being domestic and a bigger international market there. Okay, so Divergent came out in 2014. Oh, I forgot they did these back to back. So March 2014 was Divergent. March 2015 was Insurgency. And then the last one, I felt like they almost pulled it from Allegiance. It came out in 2016, March 2016. I thought they almost like pulled it. A production budget are insane for these. 85 million for Divergent. This one was 110, and so was the third movie. I think they might have shot them back to back. The opening weekend here obviously was 52, closed at 130 non-adjusted. By the time you get to Allegiant, a year later, it opens at 29, closes out at 66, half of the business of this one. So this is just sort of the middle movie of a series that petered out pretty rapidly. And you know, this performance is closer to the original performance, but by the time you get to the original, did make 276 worldwide. This one actually made a little bit more than Divergent worldwide, but domestically less. So an interesting movie about a topic that I think we all thought was entertaining 5 years ago, but like now doesn't really seem all that much at all anymore. So Divergent there was number 1 this weekend back in 2015. Number 2 is Cinderella. That made $34 million. This was its second weekend, a 9K per theater average. You know, Cinderella was kind of one of the first, kind of one of the bigger ones to be, this is before Beauty and the Beast, the live action sort of remakes. Had a great performance overall, $500 million worldwide, a bigger take internationally. The domestic take here was 37%. That makes a lot of sense. Production budget was 95 million. The inflation adjusted domestic box office for this was 217. So this is a very good performer. Obviously, did very well on VOD and rental and all that kind of stuff. Home entertainment. And basically overall, it made 5.6x its production budget in worldwide box office. That's not adjusted for inflation. So this is sort of like, one of the first feathers in the cap for Walt Disney's live action adaptation, which is now, this huge deal and a massive moneymaker for Walt Disney. This is one of, I think we'll actually see another one here on the list back in 2010. And I think that this kind of proved the concept that you could now dump in money to these other movies like a Jungle Book, like, eventually Lion King, Aladdin, all that sort of stuff. This is one of the first, and it was quite a win for Disney. Number 3, back in 2015, March 20th weekend, was Run All Night. You may not remember this one all that much. So it was the second weekend. It did $5 million. I kind of had to look up and see. I remember it vaguely. It's from Warner Brothers. This is one of those Liam Neeson action films. Remember, he was, I'll read the synopsis on this one. Brooklyn mobster and prolific hitman Jimmy Collin, once known as the Gravedigger, has seen better days. Longtime best friend of mob boss Sean McGuire, Jimmy, now 55, is haunted by the sins of his past, as well as a dogged police detective who's been one step behind Jimmy for 30 years. Lately, it seems Jimmy can only find solace at the bottom of a whiskey glass. I mean, come on. Like, this is just like, it's like pulp noir stuff. But Liam Neeson's action star here, not a great performance for this. So this was the second weekend, did 5 million. The overall domestic box office was only 26, adjusted to 28 now with inflation. Worldwide was $66 million. So not really a great run for Liam Neeson here. The problem here is that the Taken series obviously put him in a spot where Liam Neeson basically became this action star, and those are very successful films. But there was diminishing results, and they kept sort of pumping out these movies. And by the time we got to this one, it felt definitely second tier. It didn't feel vital. It just did not have the spark of his other action movies. Like even Cold Pursuit, which came out last year, kind of seemed fun. At that point, it was almost like he's Steven Seagal. Like he's just having a good time, avenging his son's death or whatever's death, or trying to, find his daughter who's been kidnapped. All those sort of action plot devices. He just really worked in that role. But now he's older. This one, for as many successes as he's had these duds. $50 million production budget for Run All Night. Only made 1.3x that production budget worldwide. So it did not do very well at all. Did it lose money? They're saying the production budget was $50 million. You'd look at total cost probably in the $150 million on all platforms. This thing definitely lost money that it could not make up on DVD or home entertainment sales. So kind of a dud here that I think I had to look it up because I was like, oh yeah, I sort of remember this, but it didn't do well enough to really register in my mind. And these are all before I started the podcast. I started the podcast in fall of 2016. So these are before I had any sort of official documentation on the podcast here. And I sort of remembered that one, but it was a big enough dud where I think most people have forgotten it. Next was The Gunmen. Speaking of duds, from Open Road, which is a distribution company that I believe no longer exists. I think they went out of business a couple of years ago. Maybe it was last year. This was, a Sean Penn film. It only did 10 million total domestic, 7 million international. So worldwide it was 18.5 million. Open Road, I believe, if I'm remembering right, was a kind of joint distribution company created by, I want to say like Regal and maybe AMC. I don't know. It was one of the major studios. And essentially what they were going to do is create movies for VOD consumption. And I think what ended up happening as they started to make these movies is like, oh yeah, actually we're going to put them out in theaters. And I don't really know what the thought process on the business side of things was. Like, oh, maybe you just throw them out in the box office because we own the theaters and stuff. We're not going to take a huge hit, but you still have to market them. This is a massive dud. One of the bigger duds, I think, of that year. A $40 million production budget for The Gunmen. What is it about? James Terrier is suddenly targeted by the world's best hitman. Terrier must dig into his top secret past to figure out who wants him dead and why. It sounds like Jason Bourne. So $40 million production budget, only made half of that worldwide, not even. And so, it's one of those films that, has Sean Penn had a big film recently? What was the last big Sean Penn film? I'm going to have to look it up now. Idris Elba is also in this. Mark Rylance, who won an Oscar for Bridge of Spies. I think after this, right? Or before, I can't remember what year that was. Let's take a quick look at Sean Penn and see where he's at. He did a voice in the Angry Birds movie. Okay, good job for you, Sean Penn. The Gunmen, I think, was the last movie that he starred in. He was in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which I think is going to be like a lost classic. I'm not saying it's a great film, but you watch that movie and it's very engrossing and entertaining. He was in Gangster Squad, Tree of Life. That's probably, he just hasn't done, his last big, huge film was Milk back in 2008, which feels like it was 100 years ago. And that only made 57 worldwide, but it had like a huge prestige artistic clout thing going on. So I think that's the last one you could really call like a massive, huge success. I don't really count Tree of Life because he's only half of it. But this was not. This is kind of his career just going out with a whimper, unfortunately. Okay, so that was number 4. Number 5 back in 2015, March 20th, was The Kingsman Secret Service. So this was in its 6th weekend. Obviously the sort of graphic novel inspired spy 60s movie. Guys, is it called a period piece, sort of, maybe? Really good performance for this. $400 million worldwide for a movie that, only cost probably under $100 million. Yeah, $94 million. So it made over 4x its production budget and its worldwide box office. If you're looking at like true profit here, you'd probably say like, oh, like 94. You know, the rule that I usually use, and this is based on sort of the deadline data from the last few years, is you want to do for a normal sort of wide release like this, you want to do about 3x the production budget, and that'll get you releasing costs for everything. I'm talking from the moment in the theater to when it goes to VOD for sale and rental, to when it goes to streaming, to when it goes to pay TV, when it goes to cable, all that kind of stuff. That's all sort of wrapped up in this number. That's why you do 3x as opposed to 2.5x, which used to be the rule. So you do 3x to get total releasing costs, and that's in every territory in the world. What you compare that to is worldwide box office. So the worldwide box office, you can expect revenue to come in as about 85 to 87, 88% of that. So this definitely made money. This made probably, I would say, at least 50 and on higher million in pure profit for 20th Century Fox, which no longer exists. So this is, a great movie. The Kingsman franchise continued on. Obviously, a couple of years back, we had Kingsman: The Golden Circle, which cost a little bit more, $104 million. That opened at 39. Worldwide box office was very similar, that surprises me because I don't know. I just didn't think that The Golden Circle did all that well, but I think it did pretty well overseas. So to sort of show you that comparison, the domestic take for the sequel, Kingsman's Golden Circle in 2017, was 25% domestic. And so the original here was lower. It was 31%. So definitely kind of shifted a little bit more overseas, but these are definitely international films. They're not, they're more like a Fast and the Furious movie now, which takes, easily sub 30% domestic take at the box office. There is a sequel to this coming out, but we just don't know anymore when anything's scheduled. I think it was scheduled for, later this fall. I don't know. Now everything's moved back. Black Widow was moved back from May 1st. This thing's not going to clear up until probably July 4th. I'd suggest it might, things that return to normal, maybe in June. It's going to be a long couple of months. But Kingsman, the third movie, is coming out at some point this year. And obviously because the first two were pretty, made a good profit for the studios. Okay, let's hop in the time machine. Let's go back to 10 years ago, 2010. The weekend was the 19th of March. Number one, I teased this one before. Alice in Wonderland from Walt Disney did $44 million in its third weekend. This one was really where Disney proved that you could do a live action adaptation of these older animated films. Here are the numbers here. $334 million domestically. And here's where inflation's going to start to come into play a lot. So that's 385 adjusted, so $50 million more. That matters. Unadjusted worldwide was over $1 billion. And they estimate on the numbers here over $100 million on home video, DVD sales, and Blu-ray sales as well. Doesn't include rentals. So that's an amazing number, an unbelievable performance. A 32% domestic share here, so a big international film. Production budget was massive, $200 million. But again, if we do sort of our back of the napkin math, total releasing costs were probably $550 to $600 million. I know that sounds massive, but that's the reality situation when you have a budget that high. Let's just guesstimate 550. Worldwide box office was $1 billion though. So you can see how when you hit a home run in this business now, it's just this huge, massive win. This thing probably took home, I would say $850 to $900 million in revenue. So at least I would say $300 million in profit, or somewhere I would say $200 to $300 million, because it's a little bit fuzzy, this math, but $250 million in profit. That's why, Disney's oh, now why it took forever to create the sequel. Let's look at the sequel. I forgot about that one. And just see because the sequel is one of the biggest it took them 6 years to make the sequel. Alice Stood Looking Glass came out in 2016. I sort of remember this coming out. Similar production budget, $170 million. Opening weekend is 26, closes out at 77, versus the 334 of the original. So they took too long. 6 years is way too long. By the time they got to that one, Johnny Depp was in a very different place in his career. The first one was just a wonderful, fun film. I remember seeing it in New York when I went to visit. And it was just a real blast of a film for everybody. And it was weird enough for adults to sort of get into, but kids loved it too. But a huge win for Disney, and really kicked off in a true sense, even before Cinderella, the live action adaptation that we now find ourselves knee deep in with Walt Disney. With Mulan too, and Mulan obviously was pushed back, was supposed to come out, I want to say this month. Yeah. Who knows when that's going to come out now? Probably in the fall or something. They're going to have to rearrange the entire schedule for all these films. It's going to be a little bit of a shit show, but hey, look, people are dying, so it's not that important. Okay, so number 2 is The Bounty Hunter. Gerard Butler, Jennifer Aniston, sort of, I guess you'd call it a rom-com kind of crime heist film. This one this weekend did 26 in its opening weekend, which is okay. Ended up at 67. Total here domestically, worldwide it did 135, kind of split down the middle between international and domestic take. With inflation adjusted, did 77 domestically, which is not terrible. Production budget was pretty low at $45 million. Did 3x that worldwide. This is kind of a weird, you would think this would do probably better than this. I think the assumption here, if I was a studio, you got Jennifer Aniston and Gerard Butler kind of in the height of his sort of rom-com. He has really a weird track in his career. He had like the rom-com stuff and then the action star. I don't know what came first. They're kind of running parallel to each other. And then Jennifer Aniston, she's had an odd, I would say, film career. But I think here was a real sort of magic moment to bring these two together. What were the legs on this? 3.2. So people didn't hate it. It just didn't really pop off like I think Sony wanted it to. And I think I've seen this. It's not good. It's kind of one of the reasons why rom-coms, this is like a canary in the coal mine, right? You have these two massive A-listers, especially Jennifer Aniston and Gerard Butler. People forget, like, back then in 2010, 10 years ago, he was a pretty big name in a lot of different types of movies. So this was a good matchup. You would expect it to at least make 100 domestically, and it couldn't get there, but like it could be a canary in the coal mine for the whole genre sort of dying off and shifting over to streaming. Also to note, 2010 was when really Netflix streaming took off. There was a time before people streamed movies on the internet, I know. And 2010 was that year that it all started to shift towards Netflix and stuff like that. So but Bounty Hunter, I think, taking a big view, is kind of when rom-com started to die off, was right around then. It's a good example of that. Diary of a Wimpy Kid was number 3 back in 2010, March 19th. Did $25 million in its opening weekend. This one, I think it had a little bit of a fanboyism thing happening. Only did 2.89x multiple on this for a children's film. That's really bad. And if we look at the franchise here really quickly, so this was the first of 4 films that have come out from the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series. They're not shot for much. This one cost 15, the second cost 18, and the last two cost 22 million. Worldwide box office, very steady, 76, 73, 77. The last one was 2 years ago. It only did 35. So obviously the series is probably coming to an end. Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the long haul. But they got some money out of it. I think the production budgets were almost micro budgets, almost like Blumhouse in the opening. And if you can make a $15 million movie, make $76 million worldwide, you're doing it right. And so this has sort of kicked off this series. But it is kind of weird. It looks like there was no sort of breakout beyond the people who were really, really into the books. This is a book series. I think that's probably what happened, because when you see multiples below 3x for a children's film, it's definitely a situation where, everybody who read the book went to go see it and there's nobody else. And I think that's probably what happened here with the entire series. And they sort of bled that audience dry by the time you got to the last movie 3 years back now. Number 4 is an interesting film. Again, March 2010, March 19th, weekend of Green Zone. So this was a Matt Damon Iraq war movie. It did $8.3 million unadjusted this weekend. And its second weekend, its total gross domestically was only $35 million. That's terrible for a film like this. Paul Greengrass was the director, a famous acting director, action director, I should say. Did a lot of the Bourne stuff. It's a very good movie. I saw it opening weekend, actually. I remember going to see this. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. But it just did, for some reason, did not connect with audiences at all. $35 million domestically should have been its opening, but that was its total. Adjusted for inflation was 40 million, so nothing. Worldwide box office was only $97 million. Production budget was 100 million. So this thing lost money. It cost, 2.5x to 3x to release this thing worldwide. They did not make that back at all. It lost a lot of money for Universal. And I can't really figure out why. If I had to guess, like thinking back to that time period in 2010, the Iraq War was something people didn't want to think about anymore. And this was, despite being a very good, well-done movie, Greg Kinnear's greatness, Matt Damon's fantastic in the lead. Brendan Gleeson's also really good in this. It's a good movie. It's almost kind of like a noir war film. He's trying to figure out what's going on. There's a lot of confusion. There's moral gray zone everywhere. But I think ultimately at this time, you think societally, people just did not want to think about the Iraq War and what happened in the Iraq War 2, which started in March 2003. And so it had been 7 years. The war was still going. I don't know when the surge happened. I think this is definitely post-surge. They just wanted to forget it. And so this movie, despite being good with a great cast and great director, just could not get people in the seats because no one wanted to relive that sort of time period about what happened, like going back. We just kind of wanted to forget about it and move on. Number 5 in March 2010, a very strange film, which I really forgot about this. Repo Man, starring Jude Law and Forrest Whitaker, sci-fi film from Universal. This thing only did $13 million total domestic, 16 if you want to adjust for inflation. Worldwide, $18 million. Insane. Terrible legs, 2.3x multiple. 76% of the take was domestic. Production budget was $32 million. I mean, this lost a ton of cash. This almost seems like a movie that Universal knew was going to be a dud and just started pulling it from releases and just put it on a couple of different territories. I kind of want to see where they did put it out. But overall, just not a great film at all for anybody involved, and everybody's forgotten it. I don't know what happened here. I'd have to do a much deeper dive to figure out why this thing was such a shit show. If I don't remember something from 2010, then that's not a good sign, because I've always been obsessively following movies. I'm trying to see the Miguel Spakonik, I believe was the director. I don't really know him all that well. He has a movie coming out later this year called BIOS, which I have heard of, because it's got Tom Hanks in the lead. So he has, recovered his career apparently, and coming back for another one 10 years later since his last movie. But Repo Man was just dead on arrival. And it did really seem like a movie where the studio pulled support. And that does happen pretty often. Didn't matter that Jude Law was in it, or Forrest Whitaker, who are two, Jude Law's less of a star. He was much bigger than, I would say, in the early 2000s than he is now. But Forrest Whitaker's always been kind of big. Universal saw it done, and they're like, we're not gonna put this out, basically. So that's 2010 March of. The takeaways there: Allison Wonderful, obviously setting this stage for the live action stuff, and the duds: Green Zone, Repo Man, Bounty Hunter. I think is kind of a dud. Diary of a Wimpy Kid is like the good example of taking a narrative universe that already existed and just putting it on film, which works. But sort of the original stuff, Bounty Hunter, Green Zone, Repo Man, all failed, and sort of kind of warned us about what was going to happen at the box office over the next decade. Let's get in the time machine and hop back to 2005. Let's take in the weekend of March 18th, 2005. 15 years ago. I can't believe it's 15 years ago. It feels like 100 years ago. Number 1 that weekend was The Ring 2, which did $44 million. This was its opening weekend. This is from DreamWorks. Does DreamWorks exist anymore? I feel like it doesn't. For some reason, I feel like it doesn't. So A Ring 2, obviously the sequel to The Ring, which was a remake, obviously, did $161 million worldwide, $75 million. Now inflation really comes into effect. Did 107 domestically, which did hit that $100 million mark that used to be the marker of success for horror films. But it did cost $50 million to make, which is high for a horror film. Legs were terrible, 2.1x legs. And so not an awesome performance. If you compare that, let's look at the Ring franchise series really quickly here. The original came out in 2002. I saw that opening weekend with like college friends, and like everybody was like, I think we were shaken after we'd seen it because it was just so Gore Verbinski, who's had a weird career since then. Cure for Wellness, go see it. It's going to be a cult classic for the next 100 years. Like Cure for Wellness is like, he wanted, like Gore Verbinski always wanted to make the BioShock film about the video game, but he couldn't. So he made Cure for Wellness, which is basically like a BioShock movie. And it's one of the most insane things I've ever seen in my life. You have to see it. But the tone of that you could see in the earlier The Ring. It's just so moody and so unlike the post-Scream era of horror that reigned for a good, this is what, that would have been 5-6 years after Scream came out. So it wasn't super ironic. It was played it straight and it was dark. So The Ring opened up only at 15, but had great word of mouth. It closed out at 250 unadjusted worldwide. And The Ring 2, I always thought The Ring 2 did so much worse, but it's really not that much worse. It did 161. It came out 3 years later, so they didn't wait too long. Did 161 worldwide. I want to see the domestic take on this. But that low multiplier is just not a good sign. You don't want to have a low multiple like that. 50% domestic, which is also high for this. And then we had the third one come out. When the hell was that? Rings came out a couple years back. Yeah, 2017, February of. Why would they 12 years later? What are you doing? Just remake The Ring. Like, just go for a reboot. Don't do the maybe it was a soft reboot. I don't know. $13 million opening weekend, closed out at $82 million worldwide, which is actually not as bad as I thought it was. I thought it was like a horrific. Dylan did like 30 worldwide. Looks like some of the foreign territories saved that one, but I don't think we're gonna see a Rings movie anytime soon, unfortunately. I love the original. Number 2 is Robots, 20th Century Fox animation film. This one, let's see what it did that weekend. It did $29 million that weekend, closed out at 74 million. Oh, that was the 70 total by then. Closed out at 128 domestic, inflation adjusted 182. Pretty strong. Unadjusted 260 worldwide. Definitely domestic film, 50% take there. Production budget was kind of high at $80 million. I think overall it definitely made a little bit of money, but didn't make a ton in profit. There's not much to say about this one. It performed pretty well. I think this is kind of the Easter slot. I think Easter was sometime around then. And I think, it played well to families. Multiple is great, 3.6x multiple. That's what you want for a children's film. Got to be over 3 easily. So it did sort of play pretty broadly here. And it was a pretty good win there for 20th Century Fox. And I think Disney involved in this one? It seemed like maybe it was like 20th Century Fox Animation and Blue Sky Studios. So no, just Fox. Actually, now they're owned by Fox is owned by Disney, so it's all the same. In any event, let's keep going. Pacifier, Walt Disney did $18 million. Let's see what it did total. $113 million total. $85 million international. Worldwide was 198. Inflation adjusted 160 domestically. Why? I mean, I remember seeing the trailer for this. Is the Vin Diesel sort of, what would you call this? Like parent hood movie, raising a kid or whatever. Brittany Snow is in this as well, famous from the Pitch Perfect movies. Pacifier at 3.7x multiple. Production budget was $56 million. Definitely made money on this. Let's see, 57% domestic take. Didn't play internationally all that well. I forgot Vin Diesel, he had this, he would kind of do a lot of things like this. He's one of those guys I think who just wants to work a lot, and will take a stupid family movie like this and just say, whatever, I'll just go for it. Definitely an Easter play, holiday film. But the fact to do 160 domestically, wow, that's really good for a movie like this. I'm surprised we didn't see the Pacifier 2. Okay, so also Walt Disney had another one out, Ice Princess. You probably don't remember this one. I had to watch the trailer for it to remind myself. Didn't do very well. $24 million domestically. International did $1 million, so $25 million total. Inflation adjusted, $34 million domestic. Had a good legs, 3.5x. What did it do? This was its opening weekend? Yeah. Did $9.6 million its opening weekend. You know, a small film. Production budget was $25 million. It made that worldwide, but this seemed, Walt Disney does this where it's a live action film about basically a girl who's a figure skater, wants to be a figure skater. It's rated G. You know, it's one of those films I feel like they threw out of the box office, not really caring how it did, just because they know that like it has this life on the Disney Channel and then on video where they make I think a lot of their cash. So this was not really a theatrical exhibition play. It was more, hey, almost like a marketing campaign for the video that was going to come out. But wow, there's some like really strange people in this. Did not do very well, but I think on video sales it definitely picked up. Number 5 was Hitch. This is back in March 18th weekend of 2005. Hitch we talked about on the Time Machine before. It's a Will Smith movie. Did 366 worldwide that year. Domestic take adjusted was 252, which is insanely high. 4x legs. Opening weekend it did $43 million. And this is, you know, rom-com. This might have been one of the most successful rom-coms of that decade. It had to have been at 252. But kind of, you know, when we got to Bounty Hunter in 2010, that genre had really started to die off. And so this is probably like the last gasp of it here as a mainstream huge success, making over $200 million domestically. They made 6.7 times its production budget on its worldwide box office, which is just fantastic. And also kind of like a lighter Will Smith that we haven't seen in a long time. You know, he was in an Ang Lee movie. Was that last year? I think it was, which massive bomb. Eva Mendes was in this. Kevin James, of course, plays his sort of counterpart, I believe, in it. From what I remember, it's one of those typical films where it's just, you know, gender banter back and forth, which is most rom-coms. It's supposed to end in marriage. It's Shakespearean. I'm sure it does. But I haven't seen it since it came out. I did see it in theaters back then. But a fantastic performance, and maybe one of the last big rom-coms that we're going to see at the box office, at least this decade. That decade, I should say. So Hitch was number 5. That's it for 2005. Let's get the time machine. Let's go. I need like a time machine noise. Let's go back to the year 2000. 20 years ago. I was a young lass. Let's see. March 24th, 2000. Number 1 was Aaron Brockovich, which I just saw on TV recently. This thing did 257 worldwide. This definitely feels like a film that would not happen nowadays. 4.4x multiple. Maybe like a good example is like a Green Book, or maybe like a Hidden Figures. Something that is adult fare, specifically for adults, about something deep, dramatic, whatever, but not like arty. It's like not an art film, but it's meant for adults. It's a broad, wide release adult drama, which you just don't have a ton of anymore. 4.5x multiple on this. Cost $15 million to make, made 5x that worldwide. This is, of course, I believe this is Steven Soderbergh, isn't it? Yeah, it is, man. He's had a really interesting career. Julia Roberts, obviously in the lead, probably in her biggest film, maybe in the last 20 years, I would guess. Inflation adjusted domestic box office was $200 million. Really just a film, you know, based on a true story about a lawyer. I think everybody's seen this movie. Julia Roberts is wonderful in it. I feel like this type of story has shifted over more to TV. Even less than like the art film or streaming world in terms of streaming movies. It seems more like a TV plot that you would see. It almost seems like a Better Call Saul sort of situation, like plot going on. But a wonderful performance for this movie back in 2000. Number 2 that weekend in March 24th, 2000 was Romeo Must Die from Warner Brothers. This is the Jet Li sort of action movie. It did $91 million worldwide. Surprisingly had a 61% domestic take here. That's another big change that we've seen. As the global box office market has gotten bigger and bigger, the domestic takes for these films has gotten less and less, to the point where we're at like a Furious 10 or whatever the next Furious movie is. I can almost guarantee it's going to be under 25% domestic take for that. But a movie like this did 61% domestic, which just, especially for what it was, the Jet Li being involved in an action movie, it seems like it would be great in Russia and Brazil and China and all these other places. It just was a different business back then. Adjusted inflation, $94 million, which is pretty good. Only cost $25 million to make, so it did 3.6x that in its worldwide box office. When's the last movie that Jet Li has been in? We gotta look this up. We gotta get curious here. So he's been in a lot of stuff. He's in Expendables 3. How did I forget the Expendables series? Expendables, those movies did huge. Expendables 1 did 268 worldwide back in 2010. Expendables 2, 2 years later, did $311 million. So he's in those movies. I totally forgot about that. He was in The Mummy back in 2008. Forbidden Kingdom in 2008 as well. Had a good 2008. Jet Li's Hero in 2004 was really big, 177 worldwide. So he's still working. It looks like he went back to his home country to do a lot of films, which are doing quite well. But this is kind of a pretty decent middle brow action film that did quite well. Number 3, a favorite of the podcast, Final Destination from New Line. And its second weekend did $9.7 million. This gives us a great chance to go through the Final Destination series and just take a look. I think we've done this before on the podcast. So there have been 6 Final Destination movies. If you don't know what Final Destination is, it is a horror film series where death is the slasher, and it stalks and kills usually young teenage college age students. It's a great premise. It's super fun. I rewatched the original probably like 3 months ago with a friend. It was a blast. Tony Todd shows up some more. I mean, it's just like a really fun series. It's definitely what I would call a post-Scream horror sort of series or group of films. It's ironic. It's funny. It doesn't take itself all that seriously. There's no vibe or tone to it whatsoever other than, oh, it's kind of a slasher, fun, ironic horror film. It does not have the vibe of It Follows or The Witch or The Ring or anything like that. It's not super dark. It's just a good time. Final Destination, this one came out obviously in 2000. March 17th was the release date. Did 112 worldwide, not adjusted. The sequel, Final Destination 2, did something similar, $90 million worldwide. Again, they're shot for so little. The production budget here for the first 3 were about 23, 26, and 25, so all well under $30 million. The third movie comes out 3 years later in 2006 and does $112 million worldwide, so still making money. 3 years later, the Final Destination, and which I don't think that I've seen, does $187 million worldwide. So obviously, inflation's taking a hold here, but still really good performance for a movie like that. Costs $40 million, but a great worldwide take. And then 2011, we had Final Destination 5, which cost $40 million and did 155 worldwide. Bring it back. That's all I want to say. Like, this thing is a moneymaker. Get Blumhouse involved. Get them, like, maybe push it up to $15 million for one of their movies. And just have a good time with it. I have a feeling that, it's been a good 5 years since I would say the horror renaissance has taken place, where we have gone to the more vibey horror films, elevated horror, as people have said, which I think is not the worst term in the world. Films like It Follows, It Comes at Night, The Witch, Raw, Get Out, I think I would toss in there. Obviously Up, Midsummer, Hereditary. All that stuff is very heady, very uncomfortable watch. I feel like we're going to need a little bit of a valve release after this pandemic. So maybe this sort of Scream style ironic horror film will come back. So let's get another Final Destination out there. It's been 9 years. I feel like, it has been announced, Final Destination 6. I'm just looking on the website here. I don't have a release date though. on it. Looks like they have a couple screenwriters involved, so that's good. That's coming back. I think we need more Final Destination movies. Number 4, back in March 24th of 2000, this weekend. Mission to Mars. Terrible film. I saw this opening weekend. I think there were competing Mars films back then. Mars was like a big deal in 2000. Obviously, we had The Martian more recently, which did amazingly well. But I forget what the other movie was. Someone will fucking remind me of it. This movie's terrible. 2.6x multiple, $90 million production budget, barely made that back, and it's worldwide box office. This thing lost money without a doubt, which you factor in marketing and all that kind of stuff. Gary Sinise, Don Cheadle, Jerry O'Connell, remember him? Tim Robbins shows up in this. A lot of interesting people. Brian De Palma directed it. I totally forgot that. Oh man, what is his deal these days? He did Domino last year. He has just sort of went off the face of the earth. He did Black Dahlia back in 2006. You remember that? That did pretty well. Oh my God, he did Snake Eyes 2 years before Mission to Mars, which is now, I would consider Snake Eyes. I think it's a great movie. Like, not actually good, but like definitely a wonderful watch. It's just super fun. Did the Mission Impossible movies back in 1996 and made that a huge breakout series that we still have massive Mission Impossible movies because of his work in this. He's had a very strange last 25 years. Okay, so Mission to Mars is terrible. It made $7 million this weekend. I don't want to talk about it because it sucks. Number 5 is American Beauty from Sam Mendes. Won Best Picture. This thing did $130 million back then. But you adjust that for inflation, $230 million. So inflation really does take effect. 350 worldwide, not adjusted. So obviously way higher than that. This thing made 24x its production budget worldwide. It only cost $15 million to make. This one has a weird history. So I would say from 2000 when this thing came out, or technically 1999, it came out limited release. But I know most people didn't see it until I would say 2000, whatever, that fall. What sort of happened here? This thing must have come back. Now that I'm looking at the release dates, I was like, wait a second, this is kind of weird. Why is this in the top 5? Because I'm looking at the release dates, I was like, this doesn't line up at all. It must have been for the Oscars. They must have re-released it for the Oscars. Because this was its 29th weekend at the box office. This thing came out in September 1999. So when I saw it, it was definitely fall of 1999. That's why I was very confused here for a second. 13, almost 14x legs. That's domestic take versus its biggest weekend. Unbelievable performance for this film. And the history of it's kind of weird. Now, 2 big questions that I would have. One, could a movie like this come out now and do well? And I think that the answer is yes. I think this is a zeitgeist film. This is a film, obviously adult drama about essentially depression in suburbia and what we do with all this glut of excess and consumerism. Maybe like a critical of capitalism and stuff like that in the life and society that we've created in America. I grew up in this world, so it definitely hit home with me because I was a teenager when I saw it. So I do think there's a place for this type of, it's almost like, I'll use the term elevated adult drama. It's like a middle brow art film is what it is at the end of the day. It's an art film that's palatable for a ton of people. It's not going to be at the downtown theater. It's going to be out in the multiplex. I think it's kind of the place. I think there are movies like that. The Way Back actually kind of reminds me of it a little bit. And I kind of, I'm going against what I'm saying. I said back then is like, The Way Back didn't really have a place out there. Maybe a movie like this could break through where The Way Back didn't. So the big question is, could it exist now and do well? I think so. I think it just has to capture what people are feeling in the moment and be marketed in the right way, have a big star. Now, obviously, the history of this film is all over the place. Kevin Spacey has been ostracized from all of society essentially because of his sexual assault charges, or not charges, I guess at this point, but accusations. He's definitely part of the big Me Too movement against sexual assault and sexual violence. That was focused really on Hollywood and actors. And so that has very much tainted the view of this film. And I think a lot of people, like film Twitter people who are, I consider younger people, under 30 for the most part, they've really picked apart this film over the last 3 or 4 years. I've seen online about how ridiculous it is and how over the top it is. And I get that. But you go back and watch this, and Sam Mendes, I just rewatched Road to Perdition like a couple days ago. It's like a masterpiece to me, Road to Perdition, like almost a masterpiece. This, I think, is not, but I think it's definitely capturing time kind of in a bottle. And like, if you wanted to know what it was like being, okay, upper middle class, white, whatever, in America, which is actually a lot of people, or even middle class to some degree, watch this movie. It's Death of the Salesman is what it is at the end of the day. And I love it because it reminds me of a lot of John Cheever stories. And I wrote my thesis on John Cheever. So I kind of adore this sort of style. And you just don't see a lot of, especially back then, you didn't see a lot of movies that looked at suburbia and suburban life and white flights and what the sort of ramifications were for that lifestyle, which I think a lot of people that did it, from 1950 to 2000, let's say, where everybody moved out to the suburbs, have your little house, the picket fence thing, that didn't exist before World War II all that much. And so it was a massive societal change for a lot of people. And no one was really, and that's why I love John Cheever's work, because he was plumbing the depths of that as it was starting. He was one of the first people to move outside New York and sort of a very up to Westchester County and that whole movement out of that city, and sort of building a little island for yourself in the countryside that became the suburbs. He was going after that really quickly and sort of describing the weird paradox of it and maybe the hypocrisy of it on a moral or even deeper level than that. I think American Beauty is a wonderful film that captures this in the year 2000. And it's just, I don't know, I think it's a good film. Obviously though, it's so weird not to even talk about with the Kevin Spacey stuff. And like, even in that movie, remember, like there's like a young cheerleader who's like 16, 17 years old, his daughter's friend, who he almost gets romantically sort of involved with. And there's a lot of problematic, as we use the term, stuff in this film. But I think you can't look at it that way. You kind of have to go back and be like, this was the year 2000. It's not now. There's a lot of things that are terrible in it, but there's a lot of interesting insight into it as well. Okay, I gotta stop ranting about American Beauty. I really like the film. I loved it when it came out. Basically changed my life when I saw it in a lot of good ways. So I have a lot of respect for that film. Okay, that is our time machine extended episode. We did 2015, we did 2010, we did 2005 and 2000. Any sort of big takeaways from any of this? Rom-coms dying off is one of them. The distance from Hitch in 2005 to 2010, The Bounty Hunter, you could see rom-coms failing. Older action stars, Gunman, Sean Penn, that failed. Run All Night failing. But it's almost like the action star older dude thing is like a baton passing thing. So it was Liam Neeson for a while, then it was Gerard Butler the last few years, and then I think Keanu Reeves owns that baton now. It's like the older action star. Disney live remake starting in 2010, hitting again in 2015, and now we're just inundated with these live remakes of animated films. And I think that's mostly it. I mean, it was kind of an interesting time. A lot of the films back in 2010, which is only 10 years ago, 2005, they just don't feel like they could get made now. Something like a Mission to Mars and Martian. It's like Mission to Mars was a disaster. Martian was done incredibly well. But you look at that's, if you want to take a look at like the distance and how time affects the industry, do a favor, watch The Martian. You've already seen it. I know it's a fun film. I kind of hate it and love it at the same time. Watch that movie, then watch Mission to Mars, and you can see the entire industry in the last, Martian was not that recent, like 4 or 5 years ago, but you can see how different the industry makes mainline huge tentpole movies. Whereas Mission to Mars is just this train wreck of terrible CGI and awful writing. Whereas The Martian is a super tight movie, extremely well produced across the board. I think we have comic book movies to thank for that, because I think comic book movies really brought the game up for the blockbusters. And like, if you're going to spend $150 150, $200 million on a film, you better make it top shelf. It better be a BMW and not a Toyota Corolla. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts that we've seen. It's the high highs and the low lows, and there's no middle anymore. Kind of like our fucking economic system. In any event, that's all I want to talk about for Time Machine. So I'm going to keep doing this, and hope you guys listen. It's a lot of fun going back and remembering all these films. I've seen most of these films, I would say. Repo Man I've definitely not seen. Ice Princess I've not seen. But I think the rest of them I've seen all of them for the most part. Let's talk briefly, because we're not having any new releases. Chris had a really good idea. Let's talk about like what's coming out on VOD, because a lot of the studios are shifting releases now to either early VOD or just getting stuff out on digital right away. So let's do that briefly. What is coming out this week is really when they started to do it. So let's talk about March 20th. We had Emma, which is already in theaters. I was going to go see Emma a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week and a half ago, and this whole like virus thing really took off. I was like, I better not go to the movie theater. But movies that are currently supposed to be in theaters that are now on VOD, Emma, The Hunt, Invisible Man, all came out a couple days ago on Friday. So check those out. Invisible Man's fantastic. I think it's really good. Really sort of a pure example of the Blumhouse model. Like, I think it cost $7 million to produce, which doesn't make any sense when you see it. You're like, how did you do this? But a really tight script, really well acted and directed, just a wonderful film. The Hunt, I've not, we talked about that one last weekend, did not do very well. It doesn't look like it's a great movie, but might be something fun to throw on during the quarantine. Emma looks okay. I think kind of mixed. Didn't really hit a home run in the art film circuit. They tried to release it wide. AMC put it as an artisan film, and its multiplexes didn't really take off, but might be worth watching if you're into sort of that story. Coming out next, these release dates are really weird. So the 24th, which is going to be Tuesday. So it looks like they do Tuesday and Friday releases now. When did this change? What's coming out? The Grunge, don't see it. Cinema score of an F. Remember, The Gentleman looks okay. Did pretty well in the multiplex box office. If you're into Guy Ritchie and you like Snatch, see The Gentleman. Harley Quinn Birds of Prey also hits on the 24th. We got a lot of stuff hit on the 24th. That one, I don't know if that's early. Might be a little bit early when it was supposed to get released. That's a fun movie. If you like comic book stuff, definitely check it out. I thought it's worth watching. I didn't think it was a masterpiece. I don't think most comic movies are masterpieces, but it's definitely on the upper tier of those films. 1917 comes out on Tuesday. Clemency comes out on Tuesday. Bloodshot, which is in theaters now. One of the biggest things, and The Way Back also comes out. So what we're seeing is like the release window collapsing because of the quarantine, which I don't know if it's going to have long-term effect or not. And where do movie theaters go after this? Are we going to have a show to do in 6 months? Are movie theaters going to die off? I don't think so. But everything is going to change after the pandemic. And I think movie theaters and movie releases is going to be one of the first things to really change. That's on the 24th. Tons of stuff coming out. 27th. You have Vivarium with Imogen Poots and Jesse Eisenberg. That looks really fascinating. Then you have I Still Believe, which only came out, was that last weekend? Or a couple of weekends ago? That's hitting VOD, only less than a month after release. And then Star Wars looks like it's coming out on the 31st, and Sonic the Hedgehog as well. So a lot of stuff coming out. A lot of stuff getting pushed out early. Mark on your calendars, those folks. April 7th, Cats hits VOD. And I think all of us in quarantine should watch that film together and enjoy the absolute absurdist bliss that is Cats. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully we'll have Chris on next weekend, and we'll talk more Time Machine stuff and kind of delve into the history of the box office. Stay safe out there. Keep your social distancing. Stay home no matter what, unless you got to go to the store. Like, this thing, we'll get through this. It's just we gotta follow sort of instructions and not be around other people in quarantine as long as we need to. Anyways, thanks guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast.